So in front of us, we have the Analog 4, which is a subtractive synth, and we'll dive more into the synthesis stuff a little bit later. When I do, I'll be using Overbridge as a visual aid. But for now, I'm going to put Overbridge away. We'll just focus strictly on the hardware. So let's say that you just got Analog 4, brought it home, you're firing it up, and you don't really know much about the Elektron workflow or how the step sequencer works. I think the best way to really see what's going on is to check out some of the preset patterns and kind of deconstruct them, get an idea of how they've been put together. If we want to play a pattern, if we look over here on the left side, we have this button that says bank group, and we have 8 letters over here, A through H. There's a light right here, and when the top row is lit, we're looking at the banks A through D. If I press bank group, this switches to the bottom row. We see the LED light changed here, and now we're looking at banks E through H. I want to look in bank A. So I'm going to hit my bank group button and make sure that I'm looking at the top banks, banks A through D. I can see down here, we have the 4 buttons, and basically the letters underneath each button, we're going to be looking at either the top bank or the bottom bank. So my light's up here. This light is lit up. We're looking at bank A. Now, I don't see any patterns displayed yet. When I do press this button, it's going to ask me, it says bank A, choose pattern. And it gives me a little time to choose a pattern. And what happens is that when I press this, down here at the bottom, all the half-lit LEDs above my circles, above my steps in my sequencer, those represent different patterns that I can choose from. So I'm going to press this button, and I'm going to choose the first pattern in bank A, which is there. So I chose that pattern, and I know that I did because looking in the display, it says A01. So I'm in bank A, pattern 1. If I want to play this pattern, I simply hit the play button. And now we can hear this pattern playing. Now I'm going to stop the pattern really quickly, and I want to just point something out, and I'll play the pattern again so you can see what's happening. That particular pattern lasted for 64 steps. As I briefly alluded to, these different buttons down here, these are all steps in our sequence. The Analog 4 uses a step sequencer, so notes are entered into these various steps here. And right now we're looking at 16 visible steps. Next to that, this button says page, and we can see there's 4 lights there. So we have 16 steps per page, and we have 4 available pages for a total of 64 steps. In the default mode, each step represents a 16th note, but that can be changed by changing the scale of our sequencer. Now, we can do this by simply holding function. This button here that says function, there's a red line next to it. All the different settings, the different areas that we can access that are written in red means that we need to hold function and then press that button to access it. So for example, it says page, but underneath scale is written in red. I hold function and I press the page button. And now here, I'm seeing some settings for the sequencer. It says pattern 64/64. So that means that the total length of the pattern is 64 steps. Next to that, if I move my arrow over here, we see a multiplier. The multiplier basically means is it going to play where each step is a 16th note. If I move up, I see 2 times. If I play it now, now it's going to play twice as fast, where every step is not a 16th note, but it's going to be a 32nd note. We're going to move through the steps that much more quickly. If I move this multiplier down, and again, I'm doing this because I can see my cursor is underneath that multiplier. I press down. Now at half speed, when I play this, now each step doesn't represent a 16th note, but it represents an 8th note. So again, we can sort of change the way that these steps are utilized, which gives us a lot more variety when it comes to using these 64 steps. Now, if we want to, we don't have to use 64 steps. If I move my cursor under the denominator, the second number in my little fraction here, if I press down, I can basically change this in increments of 16 steps. And if I want to go for something that isn't some multiple of 16, I can move my cursor under the first number, and then I can adjust the steps incrementally like this. Now, as I'm doing this, you might notice the lights here for my steps are changing. So I could also simply just say, all right, maybe I want this to be 24 steps. Right now, I'm on the second page, and I'm going to hit this button here. There we go. And it instantly went to 24 steps. Now, I think I liked it how it was before. You go ahead and move my cursor here. I'll press up, make it 64 steps, go to my multiplier, and make sure that each step represents a 16th note. Now there's two different modes for the sequencer. If I move my cursor all the way over here, where it says mode, we have the normal mode, which means that every single track, each one of our 4 tracks, is going to utilize the same amount of steps. If I go down to advanced, I can actually make it so that I have a master length. Here, under master, that's the length. So that's the length of the entire pattern. But each track could have its own independent number of steps. That's for track 2. If I select track 1, I can make it so that track 1 is only 32 steps. Track 2 is 64 steps. Maybe track 3 will be 48 steps. Oops, there we go. So that's the difference in the advanced and normal mode. And as you start to create your own patterns, having that flexibility is very nice. But let me just bring it back to the default setting. Here we go. Now I'm going to exit this mode. When you're in a page, you can get out of it very easily by simply pressing this button that says no. I press that. Now I'm back where I started at. So I listened to pattern A1. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we're in the top bank. We have the first LED lit up right here. So I'm going to press this again and select a different pattern in bank A. Let's go for pattern A9. And let's play this. So there you can hear there's some drums that are playing as well as some synth sounds. If I want to mute any of the tracks that are currently playing, I can hold the function button here. And next to the track name, it says mute. So I just muted track 1. Muting track 2. Here's track 3. And I'll mute track 4 so we just have our drums going. Now let's say that instead of stopping this pattern and going to another one, I want to let it keep playing. We can look over here where it says page. I see 4 LEDs lit up. This means that this is using 64 steps. Hold my pattern button. If I go to a different pattern, it's going to wait until this pattern is finished and then go to the next pattern. We see the tracks that I muted are still muted, so that doesn't change as we go from pattern to pattern. But what does change are the sounds being used. Let me stop this. If we look in the display, it says A11. That's the pattern that I'm currently playing, but above that, it tells us what kit that pattern is using. Each pattern can use a completely different kit, and a kit is essentially a collection of sounds. The kit contains the sounds that are assigned to our tracks, the voice allocation, and several other settings. And the kit can be stored with the pattern. So as we jump from pattern to pattern, we don't have to use the same sounds every single time. Another good example, let's jump to another pattern. Let's say A14. And without even playing it, I can see it's pattern A14 and the kit is the stoned kit. So I'm going to have a different combination of sounds now. Let me unmute these tracks, holding function and pressing the track buttons. Now for sounds like that have a very long decay tail, when you stop the sequencer, if you want those sounds to cut off more quickly, you can just press the stop button very quickly. Just press it twice and those long tails should stop. Just like that. So that's kind of the basis for how the sequencer works. Now we'll explore this in a lot more detail as we start creating our own sequences, but the main thing to take away from this is that we're dealing with a step sequencer that has a maximum of 64 steps. We can make it so that each track has its own number of steps if we want to create some polyrhythms. And the patterns we select can utilize different kits. So as we go from pattern to pattern, we're not stuck using the same collection of 4 sounds. So these are some important things to remember as we move forward.